He thought he rescued a dying puppy, but what he discovered made the ground beneath him shift. Dr. Ethan Myers was just finishing up his final patient notes at Pine Brook Animal Clinic, nestled in the heart of the quiet town of Elkridge Falls. The clock on the wall ticked steadily toward 9 p.m., its rhythmic beat merging with the faint buzz of the fluorescent lights above. Outside the windows, the sun had long disappeared, leaving only shadows flickering under the street lamps. Ethan rubbed his eyes and mumbled to himself, "Just a couple more files and I'm out of here." His final entry of the day was about Miss Alder's aging collie and her newly prescribed joint supplements. Routine stuff. The day had been filled with predictable cases, a vaccine update, a minor tooth extraction, and a cat who had somehow swallowed a sewing needle. From the back room, his assistant, Natalie Ortiz, called out, "All set with the inventory, doctor." Myers. "You need anything else before I head home?" He waved her off without looking up. "Thanks, Nat. Go get some rest." But as she turned to leave, the clinic's phone rang, sharp and sudden. Natalie paused, giving him a questioning glance. After-hours calls weren't common. They usually meant emergencies. And emergencies usually meant Ethan's quiet night with leftover lasagna and a mystery novel was canceled. "I've got it," he sighed, lifting the receiver. "Pine Brook Animal Clinic. Dr. Myers speaking." A breathless voice crackled on the line. "Doc, it's Ray Halberd. I found something up near Dry Creek Trail. I think it's a puppy, but it's in rough shape." "Bad shape." Ethan sat up straighter. "Can you describe it, Ray?" "Is it injured?" "It's small, no fur, shaking like crazy. Looked like it had been dumped. No other animals around. I wrapped it up, but I don't know if it'll make it through the night. Bring it in. I'll stay here and prep the table." Natalie had already turned back around, tossing her keys on the counter and tying her hair into a quick bun. "Emergency?" "Looks like it. Possibly an abandoned newborn. Maybe manger exposure. Let's prep warming blankets and the pediatric setup." Within minutes, they had a corner of the exam room transformed into a makeshift neonatal station. Blankets warmed in the dryer, a tiny stethoscope, gloves, IV fluids, and a heat pad, all arranged methodically. Exactly 17 minutes later, the bell above the clinic's front door rang out. Ray stormed in, cradling a bundle in a faded checkered flannel jacket. His face, sun-worn and tense, looked pale under the harsh lighting. "Thanks for waiting," he said, his voice shaky. "I've never seen anything like this, Doc. Poor thing feels like skin over bone." Ethan motioned him toward the exam table. Under the lights, Ray slowly peeled back the jacket, revealing the creature inside. What Ethan saw made his breath catch in his throat. The animal was tiny, fragile, maybe 3 or 4 days old, with skin so translucent he could see the spider web of blue veins underneath. Its limbs were thin and knobby, and the eyes, still shut, were far larger than any he'd seen on a newborn pup. The muzzle was elongated, and the paws looked off, too dainty, too long. Ethan instinctively began his exam, forcing his professional mind to override the discomfort rising in his gut. "Where exactly did you find it?" he asked, voice calm. "Just off Dry Creek Trail, near an old campsite. Heard it whimpering under some brush. No sign of a mother." Natalie prepped the warming pad without a word, but the glance she shot Ethan said it all. This was no ordinary puppy. "Thank you for bringing it in, Ray. We'll take over from here." Ray gave a small nod, clearly reluctant to leave. "You'll call if anything changes?" "Of course." As soon as the door shut behind him, Ethan and Natalie leaned closer over the table. The creature let out a faint squeak. High-pitched. Foreign. Ethan's fingers trembled slightly as he adjusted the heat lamp and watched the creature twitch in discomfort. Natalie's voice was barely a whisper. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" Ethan didn't answer. He didn't need to. Whatever this was, it wasn't just a puppy, and this was only the beginning. Its eyes were sealed shut, but the secrets it carried could shake everything he thought he knew. Dr. Ethan Myers stood silent for a long moment, the overhead light casting a harsh glow over the small, trembling creature. His fingers hovered above it, steady yet unsure. Years in veterinary medicine had taught him to expect the unexpected, but nothing in his experience, not textbooks, not night calls, not even the odd exotic rescue, looked like this. Natalie, usually confident and composed, busied herself with the incubator, though she kept darting glances at the table. The creature's skin was nearly hairless, pink with a strange bluish hue and too thin to be normal. Its limbs twitched, not with the sluggish tremor of a weak pup, but with a jerky unpredictability. Something about it felt off, wild. Ethan ran his hand down its spine, checking for injuries, noting the exposed rib cage and rapid heartbeat thumping against his fingertips. "Fever's setting in," he muttered. "Breathing shallow, but not compromised yet." "I'll prep the IV," Natalie said, already reaching for the saline solution. Ray Halberd's words rang in his head again. "I don't think it'll make it through the night." The thought sent a cold chill through Ethan's spine. He wasn't about to let this little thing die. Not on his watch. He moved quickly, guiding a butterfly needle into the creature's frail leg. There was barely enough resistance to find the vein, but after a tense moment, fluid began to drip steadily from the IV bag. The creature whimpered softly but didn't struggle. "That's a bad sign," Ethan muttered. "Should have flinched more." Natalie handed him a thermometer. "It's still warm. Could be dehydration or worse. Want me to prep formula?" "Yeah, and bring the goat's milk too. Let's mix something gentle." As Natalie worked, Ethan watched their patient's body rise and fall beneath the warming blanket. Every part of him screamed that this animal wasn't normal. The oversized paws, the shape of the head, the spacing of the ears. None of it lined up with any known dog breed. His phone buzzed in his pocket, pulling him out of his thoughts. A message from his wife, Marissa. "Dinner's in the fridge. Don't stay too late." He sighed. She'd be asleep by the time he got home, if he went home at all. Natalie returned holding a small syringe of the warm formula. "Let's see if it'll take this." Ethan cradled the animal gently, angling the syringe near its mouth. "Come on, little one. You've got to want to live." At first there was nothing, just shallow breaths and a tiny whimper. Then slowly, its mouth opened. A few drops vanished down its throat. Then more. Not much, but enough to raise Ethan's eyebrows. "Well," he said quietly, "that's something." Natalie smiled faintly. "Feeding response is a good sign." "Barely." They watched it for another hour, alternating turns by the incubator, jotting notes, administering fluids, and checking vitals. Outside, the night deepened, rain beginning to tap softly against the windows. "I've worked with thousands of dogs," Ethan said, pacing near the table. "I've seen crossbreeds, genetic anomalies, even premature pups. But this, you thinking exotic?" Natalie asked. "Maybe, or something wild." There was a long silence. Natalie leaned closer to the incubator. "You want to send out a DNA test?" Ethan's answer was immediate. "Yes, and I want it rushed." "Got it. I'll pull the kit." By 2 a.m., the blood sample was labeled and prepped for courier delivery. The creature was resting again, breathing lightly under a soft blanket, nestled inside the glowing warmth of the incubator. Ethan sat on the nearby stool, elbows on his knees, eyes locked on the tiny form. It looked so peaceful, so innocent. But something inside him, something deeper than logic, whispered, "You didn't just rescue a puppy tonight. You opened a door you might not be ready to walk through." They called it a rescue, but deep down he feared it was a mistake they could never undo. The early morning hours were a blur of beeping monitors and hushed movement. The rain outside had turned into a steady downpour, drumming softly against the roof of Pine Brook Animal Clinic, like a heartbeat keeping pace with the fragile creature's own. Dr. Ethan Myers had made the decision not to go home. He tossed a blanket onto the narrow leather couch in his office and set his alarm for an hour later. But sleep never came. His mind swirled with images of the pup, if that's what it even was, and the way it had trembled under his hands, its skin too thin, too smooth, too unnatural. When his alarm buzzed uselessly at 6 a.m., Ethan was already back in the exam room, clipboard in hand, logging notes. The temperature had stabilized. Breathing, though shallow, remained rhythmic, but its heart rate was still elevated, and it refused food after that first hesitant feed. Natalie returned at 7 o'clock sharp with 2 large coffees in hand and a knot in her brow. "Morning. How's our mystery guest?" "Still hanging in." "Barely." Ethan took the coffee gratefully. "I called in the courier," she said. "They'll pick up the blood sample by 10. DNA results in 24 to 36 hours. Ethan gave a small nod, his eyes never leaving the incubator. "Good. We need answers." The pup stirred. Its limbs kicked slightly under the blanket. Then it let out another sound, a long, soft churr. Not quite a whine, not a bark either. Something else. Natalie raised an eyebrow. "That didn't sound like any puppy I've ever heard." "Exactly," Ethan muttered. By 8:15 a.m., the first of the clinic's usual clients started to arrive. Mr. Dawson and his neurotic beagle, then a pair of rescue cats in for vaccines. Natalie handled the front desk while Ethan moved from room to room, performing exams with the motions of muscle memory. But his thoughts never strayed far from the back room. He kept checking on the pup between appointments, watching, waiting. It wasn't just the appearance that troubled him. It was the behavior, the lack of typical puppy instincts. No rooting reflex, no excited tail flicks, no instinctive snuggling when handled. It observed. Even with its eyes still sealed shut, it moved like it knew it was being watched. Around noon, the storm cleared, revealing a misty spring sun peeking through the windows. The warm glow cut across the sterile tile of the clinic hallway, landing in a soft rectangle just outside the door to exam room 2, where the pup lay curled and still. Natalie walked up beside Ethan as he stared through the glass panel in the door. "Did you sleep at all?" "Didn't want to." They stood there quietly until the sound of the front doorbell broke the silence. "I'll get it," she said. Ethan stepped into the back room and gently pulled open the incubator lid. The creature's chest rose and fell, but slower now. He leaned in, fingers ghosting over its body. It didn't react. He hated how light it still felt in his hand. No fat, no strength, just paper-thin skin wrapped around trembling bones. He whispered to it, not expecting a reply. "You've got to help me here, little one. Whatever you are, I need you to want to fight." It didn't whimper. It didn't move. But somehow the room felt heavier, like something had hurt him. That afternoon, a surprise visitor arrived. Natalie appeared in the hallway with a puzzled look. "You've got a guest. Someone named Jude Cartwright." Ethan frowned. "Jude? As in the old trapper who used to help Wildlife Services?" She nodded. "He says he heard from someone down at the hardware store that you had something weird in here." Of course, in a town as small as Elkridge Falls, news spread faster than wildfire. Ethan wiped his hands and walked into the lobby. Jude was exactly as he remembered. Tall, broad-shouldered, face like aged leather. His eyes were sharp, and when they locked onto Ethan's, the older man wasted no time. "I heard you found something strange near Dry Creek," Jude said. "Mind if I take a look?" Ethan hesitated, just for a moment, then nodded. He didn't know it yet, but letting Jude Cartwright into that exam room was about to pull them all deeper into a mystery none of them were prepared to face. One glance from the old trapper, and suddenly the vet wasn't sure if he'd saved a life or brought danger through his front door. Jude Cartwright moved with the quiet certainty of someone who'd spent more time in the woods than on paved roads. As Ethan led him down the hallway, he noted the way the man's boots barely made a sound on the linoleum floor. His presence carried weight, not in volume, but in silence. When they entered exam room 2, Jude paused. He didn't speak at first, just stood at the incubator, peering through the clear plastic walls. The pup lay motionless under the heat lamp, tiny limbs tucked beneath its underdeveloped body. For the first time all day, its breathing seemed calmer. Not better, but less erratic. Jude slowly leaned in, squinting as though trying to see beneath the skin itself. "You think this is a dog?" he asked after a moment, not looking up. Ethan folded his arms. "That's the question, isn't it?" Jude didn't answer right away. Instead, he motioned for Ethan to lift the lid. When he did, Jude reached in, his calloused fingers surprisingly gentle as he ran them along the creature's flank, studying its bone structure, paws, ear shape, and muzzle. Finally, he stepped back, his brow furrowed. "Doc, that ain't no puppy." Ethan stiffened. "You're sure? I've seen wolf pups, coyote kits, even the occasional hybrid someone tried to raise as a pet. But this," he shook his head, "something's not right. The proportions are off. And those ears, they're set too far back." Natalie, who had slipped in quietly behind them, let out a soft breath. "Could it be a birth defect? A genetic mutation?" "Maybe," Jude allowed. "But I've got a gut feeling. This thing's not domestic." Ethan glanced down at the fragile creature, now stirring lightly. "We're waiting on DNA confirmation. Blood sample went out this morning." Jude crossed his arms, his eyes still locked on the animal. "Smart move. But Doc, if it is what I think it might be, you're going to want to be careful." Ethan frowned. "What do you think it might be?" Jude didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked to the window, staring out at the clearing rain and thick line of trees in the distance. Then he turned, voice low. "Out near Dry Creek a few years back, we had reports of strange tracks. Too small for adult coyotes, too deep for foxes. We thought maybe someone had dumped an exotic pet, but we never found it. Just a lot of silence, and a whole lot of deer carcasses picked clean." Ethan's mouth went dry. "You think this is connected?" Jude's shoulders lifted in a slow shrug. "I think if you've got a wild animal on your hands, and it gets used to people, you've got a problem." The weight of the room changed with those words. The vet in Ethan wanted to dismiss the fear, wanted to see the small, helpless thing in the incubator as nothing more than a fragile life in need of care. But the man who'd seen wild eyes before, who'd stitched up dogs clawed by unknown predators, knew better than to ignore instincts. After Jude left, Ethan stood silently at the incubator, watching the pup shift under its blanket. "Something wild," he whispered to himself. That evening, the clinic closed as usual. Natalie locked the doors and turned off the lobby lights, but neither she nor Ethan left. They stayed in the back, taking turns watching the creature as if it might change the moment they looked away. By 10 p.m., the pup began making noise again. Not crying, not barking, chirping. Ethan pulled out his phone and recorded a few seconds of the sound. Then, curious, he searched wildlife calls online. He compared chirps, yips, and whines from dozens of animals. Nothing matched exactly. Nothing except one. A high-pitched call from a young coyote, nearly identical to the one now echoing softly through his dimly lit clinic. His stomach turned. They hadn't saved a puppy. They'd rescued a predator. And now they had to decide what that meant, before it decided for them. The more it healed, the clearer it became. This wasn't a recovery. It was a transformation. The following morning arrived too quickly. The clinic bathed in a soft golden hue as the sun cut through the lingering mist from last night's storm. Pine Brook Animal Clinic stirred awake, but its two occupants hadn't truly slept. Dr. Ethan Myers rubbed the tiredness from his eyes as he stood by the incubator. The pup was awake, its limbs stretching gently under the blanket. It let out a small, high-pitched chirp, sharp, quick, and far too wild to belong in any household. Ethan checked the vitals. Heart rate down slightly, body temperature normalizing, hydration stable. Whatever this thing was, it was pulling through. And yet, that fact didn't bring him the comfort it should have. Natalie stepped in from the hallway, holding a tablet loaded with notes from the overnight observations. "It's gaining strength," she said, quietly impressed. Ethan nodded. "And with every hour, it's starting to feel less like a patient, more like a question I'm not ready to answer." She gave a soft, knowing smile. "Still no word from the lab?" "Nothing yet. Maybe today." At 9 o'clock sharp, the front door chimed and the first client stepped in. A woman with a grumpy-looking schnauzer and a tale about him refusing to eat anything but cold ham. Ethan smiled politely, nodded in the right places, and went through the motions of the appointment. But every moment away from the back room made his chest tighten. At 10:15, he slipped away between patients to check on the pup. And that's when he saw something new. The creature was trying to walk. Its legs, once weak and unable to hold its weight, now pressed against the bedding as it wobbled forward. 2 steps, then 3, before collapsing in a soft heap. But even that tiny display of strength was miles beyond what they'd seen before. "Progress," he whispered almost to himself. Natalie peered in behind him. "It's trying to follow your voice." Ethan blinked. "What?" "Watch." He cleared his throat. "Hey there, little one." The pup's head turned. Not much, but enough. Its sealed eyes strained upward, as if sensing his presence. Then it tried again. Another staggered step, driven by something deeper than instinct. "Okay," Natalie murmured. "That's new." The rest of the morning passed in a blur of checkups and consultations, but between each case, Ethan returned to the pup. Each time it was stronger, hungrier, more aware. At lunch, he sat in the break room, a half-eaten sandwich forgotten on his lap. His laptop sat open before him, displaying a dozen search tabs. Premature coyote pup's characteristics, dog vs. coyote hybrid traits. Can coyotes imprint on humans? Each answer led to more uncertainty. Natalie slid into the seat across from him with her salad in hand. "You know we can't keep it here forever, right?" "I know," Ethan replied. "We're not equipped for wildlife care, especially not for something that might be illegal to house without permits." He rubbed his eyes. "I know, but you're already attached." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. That afternoon, while Ethan was administering vaccines to a pair of wiggly kittens, Natalie came rushing down the hallway. "They called the laboratory. Results are in." Ethan's heart skipped. "Tell me they emailed it." "They want to go over the results directly. Paula from Elmsbridge City Lab is on hold." Ethan darted into the office, picked up the phone, and pressed the blinking light. "Paula, this is Dr. Myers." "Hi, doctor," she replied, her voice low and cautious. "I've reviewed the preliminary genetic sequencing, and this is definitely not a domestic dog. In fact, the DNA patterns align most closely with Canis latrans." Ethan's hand tightened around the receiver. "A coyote?" "Yes, and not a hybrid. Pure. The markers are clean." Silence stretched between them for a moment. "I understand," he finally said. After the call, he sat back in his chair, stunned. No whispers of doubt now. No room for theories. This wasn't a rescue. It was a case of mistaken identity, one that could change everything. Natalie stood in the doorway. "Well?" Ethan looked up at her with a mix of awe and concern. "It's not a puppy," he said, voice low. "It's a coyote. He rescued it from the wild. Now the law might force him to send it back." Ethan had dealt with difficult cases before. Torn ligaments, terminal diagnoses, even euthanasia calls that left emotional scars. But nothing prepared him for the storm brewing inside his clinic after those 2 words left his mouth. "It's a coyote." Natalie closed the door behind her and leaned against the wall, folding her arms tightly. "So, what does this mean for us?" "It means," Ethan said, rising from his chair, "we've been housing a wild animal illegally for the past 2 days." She didn't flinch. "It also means we saved its life." He met her gaze, and something unspoken passed between them. Compassion, conflict, fear. "We'll need to notify Wildlife Services," he continued reluctantly. "They'll want to take over the case now that it's confirmed." Natalie gave a short nod, her lips pressed into a tight line. "You sure you're ready to let it go?" That question sank deep, not just into Ethan's mind, but into his heart. He turned toward the glass panel in the hallway and watched as the pup, stronger now, pawed at the side of its incubator. It had started making little hopping motions, like it wanted to explore, to break out and stretch its legs. And every time Ethan entered the room, it would turn toward his voice. "I don't know," he whispered. The rest of the clinic's day moved in slow motion. Between shots, surgeries, and cleanings, the pup's presence lingered like a shadow behind every task. Ethan caught himself checking in more than he needed to, making excuses to pass by, listening for the high-pitched chirps that now felt hauntingly familiar. Around 3 p.m., the waiting room buzzed with more than just the hum of scheduled clients. Whispers, curious glances. Mrs. Layton, the town's self-appointed gossip queen, leaned over the reception desk while Natalie tried to politely deflect her questions. "Heard there's something special back there," she said, eyes glinting behind oversized glasses. "Not a puppy, they're saying. Something different." Natalie kept her tone calm. "We're treating a found animal, that's all." Mm, hmm. Mrs. Layton wasn't buying it. "Well, people talk, dear." And talk they did. By 4:15, Ethan stepped out to the front desk to find not one, but three different clients asking about the wild animal rumor. He gave his prepared line, delivered with a clinical smile. "We're providing temporary medical support for a found creature. Wildlife officials will be notified, as appropriate." That evening, after the clinic closed and the last pet carrier had been wheeled out, Ethan and Natalie sat in the break room, both holding warm mugs and looking far more tired than they should for a Thursday. "You need to call it in," Natalie finally said. "I know." He picked up the phone, hesitated, and put it down again. "I also want to talk to someone first, someone who's handled this kind of thing before." "You mean wildlife rehab?" "No," he said. "I mean Dr. Sienna Cross." Natalie blinked. "The wildlife biologist?" Ethan nodded. "We met at a conference years ago. She specializes in predator rehabilitation and integration. If anyone can tell me what we're dealing with, or what comes next, it's her." By the time he tracked down her number and reached her, the clinic was wrapped in twilight and stillness. Dr. Cross picked up after 2 rings, her voice cool and sharp. The kind of tone that came from years of working with animals that didn't forgive mistakes. "Dr. Myers," she said. "It's been a while." Ethan laid it out quickly. The find near Dry Creek, the strange traits, the lab confirmation. She didn't interrupt, didn't react, just listened. When he finished, there was a pause. "You're lucky," she finally said. "Coyote pups that age rarely survive without their mother. If it's imprinting on you, it may already be too late for a clean wild release." The words made his stomach drop. "But," she continued, "if you're serious about helping it, there's still a chance. Keep it warm, isolated, no unnecessary human contact. Monitor its behavior. I'll drive up tomorrow morning to assess in person." Ethan thanked her, hung up, and sank back into his chair. From the hallway, the soft sound of claws clicking gently against plastic drifted through the air. The pup was awake, alive, and maybe starting to become something it was never meant to be. She studied wild predators for decades, but one look at the pup, and even she was left speechless. The sun rose with a gentle haze over Elkridge Falls, casting long golden stripes through the front windows of Pine Brook Animal Clinic. Inside, the quiet buzz of fluorescent lights returned, joined by the steady tapping of Natalie's fingers on the keyboard as she updated files. But Ethan wasn't at the front desk. He was already in the back room, crouched beside the incubator, watching the pup with a strange mix of affection and anxiety. Its fur had begun to thicken slightly. Not quite the full coat of a canine, but no longer the translucent pink skin from earlier in the week. Tufts of grayish fuzz clung to its back and ears, and its movements were now confident, curious. The pup was evolving, not just physically, but behaviorally. It didn't flinch anymore. It tracked movement with its nose and ears. And every time Ethan opened the incubator lid, it would crawl toward him without hesitation. It wasn't scared. It trusted him. At exactly 9:05 a.m., the clinic's front door chimed. Natalie stood from her desk just as a tall woman stepped inside, her boots damp with dew, her eyes sharp and sweeping the space in a single glance. "Doctor? Sienna Cross?" Natalie asked. "That's me." Ethan appeared from the hallway, wiping his hands on a towel. "Sienna," he greeted with a tired but genuine smile. "Thanks for coming." She extended her hand. "Let's see what you've got." No small talk, no easing into it, just straight to business. The kind of person who'd walked into dangerous enclosures and stared down wild animals without blinking. Ethan led her down the corridor to exam room 2. Natalie followed quietly, sensing something important was about to unfold. The moment Dr. Cross stepped into the room, her demeanor shifted. She approached the incubator slowly, her field bag still slung over one shoulder. The pup, curled near the corner, lifted its head and sniffed the air. Its ears twitched, and it let out a soft, unsure yip. Sienna crouched, her eyes narrowing. That's not what I expected. Ethan watched her face closely. Coyote? She nodded. Yes, but it's, unusual. How so? The limb proportions, the skull shape, the paws, they're too refined, too long in the digits. She opened her bag and removed a caliper and a flexible measuring tape. May I? Ethan lifted the lid and gently scooped the pup into his arms, cradling it carefully. It nuzzled his chest like a newborn, its tiny nose pressing against the crook of his lab coat. Sienna observed this interaction in silence before stepping forward. She worked methodically, measuring the muzzle, ears, paw pads, tail length. She took photos with a small camera and jotted notes in a leather-bound field book. The pup tolerated the handling well. In fact, it leaned into Ethan's hand, resting its head against his wrist as if it had done so 100 times before. That's what concerns me, Sienna said after a while. What do you mean? This level of bonding. It's past the point of familiarity. It sees you as a parent. Natalie spoke up from behind them. Is that reversible? Sienna's lips pressed into a thin line. Sometimes, with intense, specialized rehabilitation. But the longer it stays in this environment, the harder it becomes. Coyotes raised like this don't fear humans. That's dangerous. For them and for people. The room was silent for a moment. Ethan finally placed the pup back into the incubator, adjusting the blanket as it settled in. What happens if we try to release it too late? He asked quietly. It'll either die, Sienna said bluntly, or come back looking for humans. And that's when people panic. That's when calls get made. Traps get set. Bullets get fired. Natalie looked away, her jaw clenched. Sienna closed her field notebook. You did the right thing by calling me. I've seen cases like this before. There's still a chance to rewild it, if we act fast. What's next? I'll contact a wildlife rehabilitation center I trust. They've raised coyotes before, successfully, but we'll need to begin separation protocols immediately. Ethan stared at the pup, now dozing peacefully, unaware of the gravity of the conversation unfolding around it. 3 days, and he said finally. Give me 3 more days. Let me make sure it's strong enough for transport. Sienna hesitated, then nodded. 3 days, but no more contact than absolutely necessary. You're doing this to save its life, not to keep it. Ethan looked down at the incubator. He'd known this moment would come, but that didn't make it any easier. 3 days left, and every hour brought him closer to the goodbye he wasn't ready for. That night, the clinic was quieter than usual. Even the animals in the overnight kennels seemed subdued, as if sensing the shift in energy within Pinebrook's walls. Ethan sat alone in the treatment room, the low hum of machines filling the silence. The overhead lights had been dimmed, casting soft pools of gold on the clean white tile. On the counter, the chart labeled, Wild Coyote Pup, Do Not Handle, sat neatly beside a field guide Sienna had left behind. The pup was asleep in the incubator, curled up in a tight ball, its tail flicked over its tiny hind legs. Ethan couldn't help but marvel at how far it had come. Just days ago, it had arrived near death. Now it moved with strength, its breathing steady, its instincts awakening. He should have felt pride. Instead, all he felt was a dull ache in his chest. Earlier that afternoon, Sienna had begun implementing the separation protocol. She instructed Ethan to limit all non-medical interaction. No stroking, no soft talking, no eye contact unless necessary. The pup needed to start depending on itself. It needed to forget him. But that part of the plan, that was the hardest. At 10:23 p.m., the pup stirred. Its nose twitched, and it made a soft sound, a chirp that morphed into a tiny whimper. Ethan, against all instructions, stepped close. The pup rose unsteadily and padded toward the glass, pressing its nose to the wall as it always did when it sensed him nearby. Its tail made the slightest wag, hopeful and full of trust. He didn't speak. He couldn't. If he did, he'd break the barrier they'd just started to build. But inside, everything screamed against that silence. The next morning, Natalie arrived early, greeted by the unusual sight of Ethan already suited up in gloves and a face mask. He was preparing the pup's morning formula, but using tongs to move the bottle into the incubator, following Sienna's guidance to the letter. "She's serious about this rewilding stuff," Natalie said softly. "She's right," Ethan replied. "The closer it gets to me, the worse the odds." By 9 a.m., the clinic was in full swing. But behind the scenes, Ethan and Natalie worked like shadows, cleaning the pup's enclosure without being seen, delivering food without engaging, documenting behavior with cameras instead of personal observation. It was like trying to be invisible to someone who only saw you. And still, the pup didn't give up. It watched them. It followed the sound of Ethan's boots down the hall. It pressed its nose to the glass every time he walked past. By lunchtime, Natalie found him standing outside the back room door, hands clenched into fists at his sides. "You okay?" He gave a strained smile. "I don't think I've ever hated being a vet more than I do right now. You're doing what's best." "I know, and it still feels like I'm betraying it." That evening, after the clinic closed, they reviewed the day's footage. The pup had begun exploring the enclosure more freely, sniffing at corners, scratching at bedding. Instinctual behavior that hadn't appeared before. It played with a leaf that had blown in through a vent. It growled softly at its reflection. Signs of independence, signs of wildness, progress. And yet, when Ethan appeared in the footage, even for a moment, the pup dropped everything and rushed toward the glass. That night, he tried to sleep on the cot in his office, but every sound in the building kept him awake. At 2:07 a.m., he rose and walked barefoot through the dark hallway to the back room. He stopped outside the door, watching through the small window. The pup was awake, sitting upright, waiting. Its eyes, now open and clear, caught the moonlight filtering through the blinds. There was something intelligent in them, something not entirely canine. Ethan whispered so softly it was barely sound. "You've got to forget me." But the pup tilted its head, and Ethan knew it hadn't. Rumors were spreading. Whispers were growing louder. And now someone had started watching the clinic. It started with the phone calls. At first, they were harmless. Curious voices asking about that special animal they'd heard Ethan rescued. Some just wanted to know if it was true. Others asked pointedly if it was dangerous. Natalie brushed them off with well-rehearsed lines, but she knew it was only a matter of time before curiosity gave way to intrusion. By Friday morning, just one day before the pup's scheduled transfer, the town was buzzing louder than ever. "I got a message from local Channel 7, Natalie told Ethan while setting down the morning files. "They want to comment on the unusual wild animal reportedly being kept in the clinic." Ethan's heart sank. Someone must have leaked it. There were only a handful of people who knew. She nodded grimly. "Well, now the community board online is flooded. People are guessing everything from a wolf hybrid to some exotic pet gone rogue." He walked to the front window and pulled the blinds aside. A silver sedan was parked across the street. Inside, a man sat holding what looked like a small camcorder, angled discreetly toward the clinic. Ethan let the blinds drop. "We're being watched." That same morning, while prepping a routine dental cleaning, Ethan's phone buzzed on the tray beside him. He glanced at the screen. Unknown number. Voicemail pending. Later, when he played the message in his office, it was a man's voice. Curt, impersonal, and laced with authority. "This is Officer Tanya Reeve, State Wildlife Division. We've received reports about an unlicensed wild animal being housed at your location. I'll be arriving today for an inspection. Please prepare documentation and secure the specimen." Ethan stared at the screen, the blood draining from his face. The wildlife department wasn't just making inquiries now. They were coming. Natalie entered with a stack of forms. She stopped when she saw his expression. "What is it?" "They're sending someone. Today." For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Natalie set the forms down. I'll prep the back room. Together they ran through everything, sterilizing the treatment area, double-checking the pup's health records, organizing the sample vials from its blood work, and preparing the DNA report from Elmsbridge Lab. Sienna's notes were laid out neatly beside a signed letter detailing her assessment and recommendation for rehab. But all the paperwork in the world wouldn't erase the fact that they'd unknowingly kept a wild predator in their clinic for days without clearance. At exactly 2:47 p.m., a black SUV with government plates pulled into the lot. Officer Tanya Reeves stepped out, tall and composed in a dark green uniform, clipboard in hand. Her badge was visible, her expression unreadable. Inside, Ethan greeted her calmly. Officer Reeve, I'm Dr. Myers. I understand you've been caring for an animal found near Dry Creek. We're here to determine whether that care falls within regulatory compliance. Natalie stood beside him, arms crossed tightly. We're cooperating fully, Ethan said. You'll find everything documented, and a wildlife biologist has been involved from the beginning. She followed him through the hallway and into the back room. The pup, now stronger than ever, stood alert in its enclosure, staring up at the newcomers with bright, curious eyes. Its once withered frame had filled out. Its fur had thickened. It looked alive. Officer Reeve paused at the glass. That's not a dog, she said plainly. No, Ethan replied. It's not. She read through the DNA confirmation. She checked the vet's notes, the logs, the feeding records, the transfer plans. You were lucky this didn't spiral out of control, she said. This kind of imprinting can't be reversed in some cases. If this animal had gotten loose, if someone had tried to take it home thinking it was a pet. I know, Ethan said softly. Officer Reeve nodded. We'll allow the transfer to the rehab facility under strict supervision, but this clinic will need to review its intake protocols. Understood. She took a final look at the pup, who now pawed gently at the glass, ears perked. He trusts you, she said. That's not always a good thing. As she walked out, Ethan stayed behind. He watched the pup, so small, so unaware of the chaos circling around it, and felt a hollow ache swell in his chest. He hadn't just saved it, he'd changed it. And now the hardest part was still ahead. The clock was ticking, the cage was ready, and he still hadn't found the strength to say goodbye. Saturday morning arrived draped in the soft stillness that only comes before something irreversible. Pine Brook Animal Clinic sat under a hazy golden sun, its windows glowing faintly in the dawn. Inside, the walls held a quiet weight, like they knew this would be no ordinary day. Dr. Ethan Myers stood at the sink, washing his hands more out of ritual than necessity. He stared at his reflection in the metal faucet, eyes lined with exhaustion, face unshaven, heart heavy. Today was the day. Today the pup would leave. The carrier sat on the counter beside him, soft-sided, professionally ventilated, lined with fleece. Sienna had dropped it off the evening before, along with final instructions and transfer paperwork. Everything was prepared, everything was in place, except Ethan. Natalie arrived early, a to-go coffee in one hand and a hollow smile on her face. You sleep? Barely. She handed him the cup. Did you tell it? He looked down. Tell it what? That it's leaving. Ethan managed a breathy chuckle. I don't think it needs words. I think it already knows. The pup had changed again overnight. It was standing more, moving freely, even testing the lock of the enclosure with its teeth. Its body had grown more symmetrical, its gait more confident. And yet, when Ethan entered the room, it still stopped everything it was doing to look at him. Its ears would twitch, its tail would wag, just barely. Its posture would soften. Not fear, not dominance, recognition, connection. And that's what made it hurt the most. At 10:30 a.m., Sienna arrived. She moved with her usual focus. Clipboard in hand, sleeves rolled to her elbows, boots trailing bits of mud from the sanctuary outside town. She took one look at the pup and nodded. It's ready, she said, more to herself than anyone else. She ran a final series of checks. Reflexes, heartbeat, hydration, weight, all optimal. Then she glanced at Ethan. You okay? He didn't answer right away. Number. But that's not what matters. Together they stepped into the back room. Natalie remained in the hallway, arms folded tightly as if bracing herself for the emotional blow. Ethan crouched beside the enclosure and opened the door slowly. The pup didn't run or hesitate. It stepped out and walked straight into his hands. It was heavier now, solid, stronger. It pressed its head into the curve of his neck, exhaling softly. Sienna stood back, giving him space. You've got maybe 60 seconds, she said quietly. That's all I can give you. Ethan closed his eyes. He wanted to speak, to say something profound, something lasting, but his throat closed around the words. Instead, he just held the creature for 60 full seconds, remembering every cry, every syringe, every midnight vigil. Then slowly, he guided it into the carrier. The pup turned once, nose brushing the mesh side. Its bright amber eyes locked onto Ethan's one last time. No sound, just a long, steady look. Then it curled up in the blanket and didn't move again. Sienna zipped the carrier shut and lifted it with practiced care. I'll take it straight to the sanctuary. The team's already prepped. He'll be kept in isolation with minimal human contact. The next few months are critical. Ethan nodded. You saved it, she added, pausing at the door. But now it's time to let it become what it was meant to be. The door closed behind her, and Ethan was alone in the hallway. The silence left behind felt immense. He leaned against the wall, sinking slowly to the floor. Natalie walked up, tears in her eyes. She knelt beside him and placed a hand on his shoulder. He'll be okay, she whispered. But Ethan didn't answer, because deep down he knew. This was never just about saving a life. It was about loving something wild and knowing you could never keep it. The carrier was gone, the rooms were quiet, and the space the pup had filled now echoed with everything left unsaid. By Sunday morning, Pine Brook Animal Clinic felt unfamiliar. The air was still sterile, the machines still hummed, and the scent of antiseptic still lingered in the halls. But something was missing. Something small, wild, and wordless that had, for a time, made the clinic feel like it had a heartbeat of its own. Ethan didn't unlock the doors at 8 a.m. as usual. He didn't walk his usual path to the treatment room or prep the surgery trays. Instead, he stood in the back room, in front of an empty enclosure. The bedding was gone, the heat lamp unplugged, the food bowls removed. Nothing remained except the faintest outline of where the incubator had rested for a week. Natalie peeked in a moment later, gently holding 2 mugs of coffee. You know, you could take the day off. I wouldn't know what to do with it, Ethan replied without looking up. She walked over and handed him the mug. Maybe go home. Breathe air that doesn't smell like iodine. Ethan gave a faint smile. Feels wrong, like I'm abandoning something. Natalie leaned against the counter. You didn't abandon him. You let him go. That's different. He nodded, but it didn't feel different. Not yet. Later that day, Sienna texted. Update, he's adjusting well, eating, exploring. Growled at a mirror today. Good sign. We'll send photos. Ethan stared at the message for several minutes before replying with a simple, thank you. But even after getting the confirmation that the pup, no, the coyote, was safe and adapting, Ethan couldn't shake the ache. By late afternoon, he found himself sitting at his desk, flipping through his own medical notes on the pup. Every line held a memory. First IV insertion, first temperature check, the night he took formula for the first time. At the back of the file, Ethan found a sheet of blank paper. Without thinking, he scribbled down a single sentence. He trusted me before he even opened his eyes. And that was the truth. That was what made it so hard to let go. The rest of the day passed quietly. The clinic handled only emergency calls. Natalie rescheduled routine appointments for the week ahead, giving Ethan room to process, though he barely acknowledged the kindness. At one point, he wandered to the front window and opened the blinds. The silver sedan that had sat across the street for days was gone now. The press had moved on. The town's whispers had turned elsewhere. But for Ethan, the story wasn't over. Around sunset, his phone buzzed again. This time it was a photo. The coyote pup, no longer weak, no longer trembling, stood proudly in a grassy enclosure at the sanctuary, its ears perked, its posture alert. Behind it, two more young coyotes explored nearby under the watchful eye of a handler. The caption read, "Learning how to be what he was always meant to be." Ethan saved the photo, and for the first time in days, he allowed himself a smile. Later that evening, as he locked the clinic and stepped outside, the air smelled like pine and fresh earth. Spring had settled in fully, a new season. He stood for a moment on the front steps, watching the wind move through the trees beyond town. Somewhere out there, the pup was learning to live without him. Now it was Ethan's turn to do the same. The pup was gone, but the town hadn't stopped watching, judging, whispering, and now Ethan was at the center of a storm he didn't ask for. By Monday morning, Pine Brook Animal Clinic had returned to routine, at least on the surface. The smell of coffee drifted through the lobby. The phones buzzed with appointment confirmations. Natalie sat behind the front desk with her usual calm efficiency, checking in clients and answering calls. But there was a tension in the air, subtle but unmistakable. People were talking. The community board had exploded over the weekend. One blurry photo of Ethan holding the pup, taken through the clinic window, had been posted, captioned, "Vet keeps wild animal for days." Was it safe? Was it legal? The post had over 200 comments by the time Natalie saw it Monday morning. Some were supportive. "That man saved our beagle last year. If anyone's qualified, it's him." "What would you have done? Let it die." He did the humane thing. But others were not so kind. If that coyote had attacked someone, then what? Illegal is illegal. What kind of vet can't tell a dog from a predator? Natalie didn't show Ethan the post. She knew he'd already shouldered enough. But the fallout was real. That afternoon, during a checkup for a spaniel named Rosie, Mrs. Donahue leaned in and asked, "So, was it true? Was it really a coyote in there?" Ethan offered a polite clinical response. "It was a rescued wild animal. We ensured proper care and coordinated with licensed wildlife professionals for its safe transfer." Mrs. Donahue nodded, lips pursed. "Still, a bit risky, don't you think?" Later, during a nail trim for a Maine Coon cat, a teenager asked if the mutant dog had bitten anyone. His mother shushed him, but the damage was done. Ethan tried not to let it affect him, but every question felt like a quiet accusation. Every sideways glance from a client felt heavier than it should have. By Wednesday, local reporter Gina Marks showed up unannounced, microphone in hand. "Just a quick on-camera question, Dr. Myers. Did you knowingly shelter a wild animal inside your clinic? And did you obtain legal clearance for that?" Natalie stepped between them before Ethan had to answer. "We're not taking media questions. This is a medical facility. Please leave." But Gina's voice rose just enough to be caught by her cameraman's mic. "And if a child had gotten close? If it had escaped?" That night, Ethan sat alone in his office, the soft tapping of rain on the windows marking the rhythm of his thoughts. He scrolled through anonymous emails, some kind, some not. "Hero. Reckless. Thank you for caring. Hope you lose your license." He set the phone down and stared at the dark reflection in the window. The pup was gone. The cage was empty. But the spotlight it left behind burned hotter than ever. Around 8:30 p.m., a knock echoed through the quiet clinic. Ethan opened the door, surprised to see Jude Cartwright, the old trapper who'd first raised the alarm. Jude held a small paper bag in one hand and a flask in the other. "Thought you might need this," he said, offering both with a grunt. Inside the bag, homemade jerky. Inside the flask, something strong enough to silence a week's worth of regret. Ethan gave him a tired smile. "You came to lecture me again?" Jude shook his head. "Nope, you did the right thing, even if most folks won't understand it." He sat across from Ethan in the break room, boots muddy, face weathered, voice calm. "You gave that animal a shot at life," Jude said. "Most people wouldn't have bothered. They'd have turned around and said, 'Not my problem.' You didn't. That matters." Ethan exhaled. "It doesn't feel like it's enough." Jude took a long sip from the flask and leaned back. It never does. But you sleep better when you know you did what was right, not what was easy. They sat in silence for a long time after that. Outside, the rain kept falling. And inside, for the first time in days, Ethan felt just a little bit lighter. He'd given the pup a chance at life, but when he saw what it was becoming, he realized he'd done even more than that. It was Thursday morning when the email arrived. Ethan had just finished reviewing x-rays for a boxer with a fractured toe when Natalie walked into his office, tablet in hand, eyes wide. "You need to see this," she said, handing it over. The subject line on the message read, ERE Progress Update. Subject, Coyote, male juvenile, tag number 314-B. Sent by Sienna Cross. Ethan opened it and immediately saw the attached photos. The first showed the pup, now visibly older, stronger, and more alert, perched on a small hill inside the sanctuary's open field enclosure. His coat had fully come in, a healthy blend of silver and tawny brown. His ears stood tall, and his gaze was fixed on something in the distance. There was no hesitation in his posture, no weakness, no trace of the trembling, near-death creature Ethan had cradled just 10 days ago. Sienna's message read, "Thought you'd like to see how far he's come. We've begun limited group introductions. 2 other juveniles, similar age, both from separate rescues. Your pup has shown excellent social instincts, play behavior, food protection, territorial marking. He's starting to act like a real coyote. No signs of reattachment to humans since transfer. Rewilding is working." Ethan blinked at the screen. Natalie leaned over his shoulder. "He looks wild." "He looks like he's supposed to," Ethan said softly. The second photo hit harder. It showed all 3 young coyotes in the field enclosure, tails high, bodies low, playing a chase game that kicked up tufts of dust as they ran. His coyote, the one he'd fed with syringes and wrapped in heated towels, was out front, paws lifted mid-stride, tongue lolling, joy obvious in every muscle. It was the first time Ethan had seen him truly happy. Not just safe, not just healing. Free. "He's not coming back," Ethan murmured, almost to himself. And Natalie, ever the realist, simply nodded. That was never the goal. But even as they returned to the day's appointments, a Labrador with seasonal allergies, a cat recovering from dental work, a ferret needing vaccine boosters. Ethan carried something different in his heart now. A weight had lifted. The following evening, long after the clinic had closed and the last lights were turned off, Ethan stood on the back porch of his small cabin just outside town. The sky above was thick with stars, scattered like dust across velvet. The woods stretched behind him, alive with distant sounds. Frogs, owls, the whisper of leaves moving in the wind. And somewhere out there, not terribly far away, was a sanctuary surrounded by high fences and soft grasses. A place where his once fragile patient now ran freely beneath the moon. He could almost picture him now, head lifted, nose in the air, learning the scent of rabbits and pine sap, learning what it meant to survive. No collar, no cage, no human voice calling him back, just instinct, just freedom. Ethan wrapped his arms around himself and closed his eyes. It wasn't just a story of rescue anymore. It was the story of letting go right. He thought the story was over. But when the sanctuary called, the hardest goodbye hadn't even happened yet. It was a quiet Tuesday morning when Ethan's phone buzzed. He was sipping coffee on the clinic's side patio, watching a squirrel dart between the hedges, when the screen lit up with a message from an unfamiliar number. "Dr. Myers, this is Sienna Cross. We're scheduling the soft release for tag number 314-B. He's completed the rewilding phase. If you'd like to be present, one last time, you're welcome to join us this Saturday at 6 a.m. at the outer boundary gate. Let me know." Ethan stared at the message, his thumb hovering over the screen, his stomach twisted with something that felt like a mix of anticipation and dread. He hadn't expected this. He thought the chapter had closed, that his role had ended with that zipped-up carrier and a silent goodbye in the clinic hallway. But now, he had a choice. Back inside, Natalie caught the look on his face. "What is it?" "They're releasing him," he said quietly. "This Saturday." Natalie blinked. "Already?" "Apparently he's ready." Ethan paused. "They invited me." She tilted her head. "You gonna go?" "I don't know." "Well," she said, setting down her file, "you'll regret it if you don't." He nodded, though the knot in his chest didn't ease. For the rest of the day, Ethan moved like a man with 1,000 thoughts pressing down on his shoulders. He treated a terrier with a skin rash. He consulted on a lab with hip dysplasia. He updated files and answered calls. But through it all, that message sat heavy in his mind. By Friday night, he still hadn't replied. That evening, after locking up the clinic, he drove out to the edge of the forest road where Dry Creek Trail began. The same trail where the pup had first been found. The same woods where it had likely been born. The trees whispered in the breeze. The trailhead sign creaked on its hinges. The night smelled like pine, damp leaves, and something deeper. Something alive. He opened his phone, thumb trembling slightly, and finally typed, "I'll be there." He hit send and exhaled. Saturday came early. The sun hadn't yet broken the horizon when Ethan pulled up to the remote boundary gate of the sanctuary. The world around him was still cloaked in pale gray mist, the trees shadowy sentinels watching silently. Sienna was already there, along with 2 sanctuary staff members, both wearing neutral earth-tone gear and carrying walkie-talkies. A large crate sat in the bed of the pickup truck, covered with a heavy canvas sheet. Sienna gave him a nod. "You made it." Ethan nodded back, words lodged in his throat. "We keep these moments small," she explained quietly. "No fanfare, no noise, just space and instinct." He walked slowly to the truck. One of the staff members gently peeled back the cover. Inside the crate, resting on all fours, stood the coyote, stronger than ever. Lean and wild, muscles coiled with energy, fur sleek and thick. His amber eyes stared out through the slats, calm but focused. And then, they locked with Ethan's. For a moment, time stopped. Recognition bloomed in those eyes. Not the neediness of a domesticated animal. Not fear, but acknowledgement. Ethan stepped closer, crouching slightly, just enough to bring his gaze level with the animal inside. "Look at you," he whispered. "You're ready." The coyote didn't move, didn't whimper. Just watched him. Silent, unmoving, alive. Then Sienna gave a subtle nod to the staff. The crate was lifted gently from the truck and placed near the open gate leading into the edge of the reserve's forest corridor, the place beyond which no humans went. A final stretch of soft earth, unmarked, unbounded. They unlatched the crate. For a long, still moment, nothing happened. Then the door creaked open. The coyote hesitated, his eyes flicking between the forest and the man he once relied on. Then with fluid grace, he stepped forward. Outside onto the earth, into the wild. He didn't run. He didn't look back. He just disappeared between the trees, vanishing like a ghost in the morning mist. Ethan stood there long after he was gone, not heartbroken, not empty, but full of something he couldn't quite name. Because this time, goodbye wasn't about losing something. It was about setting it free. The pup was gone. The forest had taken him back. But what stayed behind was something that would never leave Ethan again. The following week unfolded quietly at Pine Brook Animal Clinic. No news crews, no protests, no wildlife department follow-ups. Just the usual rhythm of a small-town veterinary practice, getting back to what it did best, healing. And yet, everything felt different. Ethan noticed it most in the stillness between appointments, in the way he hesitated outside exam room 2, even when it was empty, in the way the staff still walked a little softer around the hallway where the incubator had once glowed with life. The room had since been cleaned, supplies reorganized, and equipment moved, but somehow it still felt sacred, as if part of that strange little animal had embedded itself into the air, into the walls. into the silence. On Thursday afternoon, while finishing up paperwork for a spayed German Shepherd, Natalie popped her head into Ethan's office. "You've got mail," she said, holding up a thin envelope with no return address. He frowned, took it, and slid a finger beneath the seal. Inside was a photo, printed on glossy paper. The coyote pup, now nearly unrecognizable, stood tall on a sunlit ridge. His coat was thick, his stance proud. And behind him, barely visible in the background, two other coyotes moved like shadows, half blurred by motion. They were free. They were wild. And one of them had once curled up in Ethan's hand, small enough to fit beneath his palm. No note, no name, just the image, and everything it said without saying anything. He propped it up on the corner of his desk with a quiet reverence, then returned to his charts with a steadier hand. By Saturday, the whispers in town had mostly faded. People had moved on to other dramas: a suspected bear sighting near the trailhead, a local bakery raising prices, the mayor's nephew's unfortunate haircut. But the ones who mattered, the longtime clients, the ones who knew Ethan not just as a vet but as a neighbor, they stayed loyal. Mrs. Alder brought him cookies. Mr. Dawson offered to help fix the clinic's back gate. Even Jude Cartwright stopped by again, not to drop off jerky this time, but just to sit on the porch and talk. "You know," Jude said, sipping from a chip thermos, "I've been thinking." Ethan arched a brow. "That sounds dangerous," Jude grinned. "Maybe, but you did something rare. You didn't just save that animal. You let it go. Most folks wouldn't." Ethan looked out across the parking lot, where a family with two cats was loading their carriers into the trunk of a red minivan. "I didn't do it for praise." "I know," Jude replied. "That's why it matters." On Sunday morning, Ethan arrived early to the clinic. The sky was pink and soft with the promise of spring. He unlocked the doors, turned on the lights, and stood in the lobby for a long moment, listening to the quiet hum of the building. Then he walked to the back room. Room 2. He stepped inside, paused, and turned on the light. It was just a room now, but he knew, deep down, it would never be just a room again. Not for him, and maybe not for the next animal that came through his doors. Not for the next fragile life someone found trembling on a trail. Not for the next wild thing with a heartbeat that didn't know where it belonged yet. Because now Ethan understood something he hadn't before. Sometimes the job wasn't just to heal, sometimes it was to hold something until it remembered who it was supposed to be, and then to let it go. He never told the story for attention, but sometimes the quietest acts echo the loudest, especially in the hearts of those who needed to hear them. Spring in Elkridge Falls bloomed fast and full. By mid-April, the meadows had turned green, the trees heavy with new leaves. Birds nested along the eaves of the clinic roof, and the town farmers market opened with cheerful fanfare. Life, as always, moved forward. And yet Ethan noticed something had shifted, not just in himself, but in the way people looked at him. The whispers had softened, the skepticism faded, and in its place something else had begun to bloom. Respect, not loud, not dramatic, just quiet nods from longtime clients. Fresh flowers left anonymously on the front counter. A note taped to the door one morning in messy kid handwriting. "Thank you for helping that animal. You're a hero." Ethan didn't feel like a hero, but he smiled anyway. The following week, he was in the middle of reviewing lab work when Natalie walked in, holding a manila folder and an expression he couldn't quite read. "This came in from City Hall," she said. He raised an eyebrow. "Did I forget to pay my license fee again?" She shook her head. It's a proposal from the Parks and Wildlife Outreach Council. They want to partner with local veterinary clinics to build an educational program. Wildlife awareness, safe animal handling, local conservation. Ethan's brow furrowed. "That's new." "They mention you by name," she added. He opened the folder. Inside was a formal letter and a printed agenda for a pilot program titled "Between Wild and Safe, Coexisting with Nature in Small Communities." The letter read in part, "Your recent case involving a juvenile coyote has brought important public attention to the growing overlap between rural human life and native wildlife. We believe your perspective as both a veterinary professional and someone with firsthand experience makes you uniquely positioned to help educate others. At the bottom in pen, we'd be honored to have you speak. Ethan leaned back in his chair. A year ago, he would have said no. 6 months ago, he would have doubted his value. But now he understood that sometimes the people best equipped to talk about wild things were the ones who had quietly held them when they were at their most vulnerable and let them go when it mattered most. Tell them yes, he said. Natalie smiled. Thought you'd say that. 2 days later, during a visit to the Elk Ridge Elementary School for a vaccination drive, Ethan noticed a boy in a faded red hoodie standing near the edge of the playground, watching him intently. Ethan offered a small wave. The boy hesitated, then walked over. "You're the vet, right?" he asked. "The one with the coyote?" Ethan knelt slightly. "I am. My name's Ethan. You like animals?" The boy nodded. "I want to be a vet too. Or maybe a park ranger." Ethan smiled. "That's a great goal." "Did it hurt to let him go?" the boy asked. "The coyote?" Ethan's expression softened. "Yeah, it did. But it felt right too." The boy seemed to think about that. Then he gave a serious nod like he was storing the thought away for later. "Okay." He turned and ran back to his class, leaving Ethan standing alone with a heart unexpectedly full. That night back at the clinic, Ethan walked through the quiet halls and paused again outside exam room 2. The lights were off. The room was empty. But in the stillness, he imagined the sound of tiny claws on tile, the soft yip of a creature who had once needed him, and now needed no one. He placed his hand on the doorframe, not in mourning, but in gratitude, because the story hadn't ended with the release. It had just begun to echo. He let it go. He moved on. But the wild doesn't forget, and when it returned, it didn't come alone. 3 months passed. Summer had stretched across Elkridge Falls like a warm, golden quilt. The clinic was thriving. A full schedule, new clients, and a growing reputation as not just a place of healing, but of compassion. Ethan had spoken at 2 community events and was invited to give a guest lecture at the local college. Life had found its rhythm again. The coyote pup, now long gone, was still occasionally mentioned in passing, mostly by clients who'd followed the story online. But the frenzy had died down, replaced by more ordinary concerns: flea treatments, torn dew claws, vaccinations for new kittens. It was by all accounts peaceful. Until the morning it wasn't. It was a Tuesday when the phone rang, the line usually reserved for after-hours emergencies. Ethan, in the middle of checking a bulldog's ear infection, glanced at the display. The caller ID simply read, "Ridgewood Sanctuary, Sienna Cross." He excused himself, stepping into his office to answer. "Sienna?" Her voice was calm but laced with something else. Concern, uncertainty. "Ethan, we've had a situation. Thought you should know." He gripped the phone tighter. "What happened?" "One of our adult coyotes crossed the outer perimeter. We've got eyes on him. He's not aggressive, but he's been circling the fencing. What's strange is he's not alone." Ethan's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "There's a juvenile with him, too young to be his sibling, not old enough to be part of his original pack. But here's the thing, Ethan." She paused. "We scanned him with our long-range tag reader. It's him." Silence stretched for several seconds. "Your pup," she added. "Tag number 314-B. He came back, and he brought another one with him." Ethan sat down slowly. "Why would he return?" "That's what we're trying to figure out," she continued, voice steady but edged with curiosity. "We haven't made contact yet. They're staying just outside the main line. But the younger one appears dependent on him." The staff noticed something else too. Every time a human gets close, the tagged one places himself between the person and the juvenile. "Protecting him," Ethan whispered. "Yes," Sienna said. "Just like you did for him." The words hit like a quiet bolt of lightning. Ethan exhaled, staring out his window at the distant woods beyond the parking lot. "What do you need from me?" "We're not sure if this is a behavioral imprint from his early days, or something deeper, a sense of territory, bonding. We'd like to try a soft reorientation at the outer field pen. Calm conditions, familiar voices. If you're willing to be present, Ethan was already reaching for his coat. Send me the coordinates. The sanctuary field perimeter was quieter than he remembered. Sienna and her team had set up a shaded observation blind near a tree line, overlooking a narrow path where the coyotes had been sighted. Ethan arrived just before dusk, greeted with nods and hushed updates. They've been lingering around the ridge, one handler whispered. Haven't gone far all day. They handed Ethan a set of binoculars. And there, silhouetted by the sinking sun, stood two figures on the hill. The older coyote was unmistakable. Tall, graceful, wild-eyed, tag glinting faintly on one ear. The younger one, smaller and more timid, remained close behind, ears flicking nervously at every gust of wind. Ethan crouched beside the blind and spoke softly, just above a whisper. Hey there, little guy! The older coyote's head snapped toward the sound. For a breathless second, neither of them moved. Then, slowly, the coyote took one step forward. Then another. The younger one followed. Sienna whispered behind him, He remembers you. Ethan couldn't speak. His throat had closed up with something tight and full. They stopped just 30 yards from the blind. The coyote tilted his head. His eyes, wild but intelligent, locked onto Ethan's again. No fear, just familiarity. Ethan didn't move, didn't break eye contact, just offered a soft, steady presence. After a few long moments, the coyote gave a single low woof, almost like a sigh. Then he turned, gently nudged the younger one toward the woods, and vanished into the trees. Ethan stayed kneeling for a long time. The reunion had lasted only minutes, but it had said everything. It was supposed to be over. But when the coyote returned, not lost, but leading, Ethan realized their bond had never been broken. It had simply evolved. The sanctuary was still when Ethan finally stood from the ground, brushing pine needles off his knees. The golden light of dusk had melted into deep violet shadows, and the trees rustled with the calm of evening. Sienna stood a few feet behind him, arms crossed, gaze fixed on the tree line where the coyotes had disappeared. That was extraordinary, she said quietly. Ethan nodded, still watching the shadows. He wasn't lost. No, she agreed. He brought someone. The younger coyote's presence had surprised everyone. But Sienna, with her decades of behavioral study, had a theory. Abandoned, orphaned, or separated, the juvenile had likely been taken in by Ethan's former patient. Adopted in a way. They don't usually do that outside their pack, she explained. This isn't normal behavior. It's protective, intentional. Ethan didn't need to be told what that meant. His influence had lasted, not just in memory, but in behavior, in instinct, in the very way this once helpless pup now moved through the wild. He had not only survived, he had learned, and now he was passing it on. That night back at home, Ethan sat on his porch beneath a star-patched sky, holding a mug of tea gone cold. The air was rich with crickets and the occasional flap of a bird taking to a high branch. And somewhere out there, just past the hills, was a creature who had once depended on him for everything. Now that creature was protecting someone else. That thought, more than anything, brought tears to Ethan's eyes. Not from sadness, but from an overwhelming kind of peace. Over the next few weeks, Ethan returned to the rhythm of the clinic, but he did so with a softened posture, a clearer mind. His voice was gentler with clients, his eyes more patient with frightened animals. There was something grounding about the way he moved now, as if he'd learned a new kind of medicine, one that didn't come from textbooks. Word of the coyote's return had quietly spread. The sanctuary had not made an official announcement. They wanted to protect the animal's anonymity. But within Elkridge Falls, the story took root in whispers and retellings. At the bakery, a young girl asked if the wild dog who came back was now a hero. At the library, a retired ranger gave a talk on animal empathy, referencing the vet who earned a predator's trust. And at Pine Brook, clients began showing up not just for treatment, but for advice. How do we keep raccoons out of the shed without hurting them? What should I do if I find a baby fox? Can you teach my son how to care for animals like you did? Ethan realized something was happening. A shift. People weren't just learning how to keep animals away anymore. They were learning how to live with them. That realization gave him purpose beyond any paycheck or routine. One evening, after the last patient had gone and Natalie was filing papers at the front desk, Ethan placed a folder on her counter. She looked up. "What's this?" "A new idea," he said. "Community education, school visits, wildlife coexistence seminars, maybe even a mentorship program for local kids." Natalie opened the folder and skimmed the first page. Her eyebrows lifted. "You're building a bridge," he smiled. "Maybe it's time someone did." Outside, the wind rustled through the pine trees beyond the parking lot. A hawk circled high above, its cry echoing in the fading light. And somewhere in those woods, a young coyote paused at the edge of a clearing, watching a smaller one pick its way through the grass. No leash, no collar, just legacy. He thought he'd saved just one life. But then a child's letter arrived, and Ethan finally understood the ripple effect of kindness. It was a quiet Monday morning when the envelope arrived. No logo, no postage stamp. Just a crumpled piece of paper folded twice and tucked into the clinic's mailbox with a rubber band wrapped tightly around it. Natalie found it as she sorted through the day's bills and circulars. She nearly tossed it aside until she saw the handwriting on the outside. "For Dr. Myers, from Logan, Mrs. Delaney's class." She brought it straight to Ethan, who was in the treatment room checking over a golden retriever with a limp. When he opened the note, a small piece of lined notebook paper unfolded. The handwriting was large and slightly crooked, the kind of careful lettering only a determined third grader could produce. It read, "Dear Doctor Myers, my name is Logan. You came to our school last month. I like the story about the coyote. I told my mom I want to be like you when I grow up. She said I can start by helping the kittens in our barn. So I made a sign and put it outside. It says, Logan's Wild Animal Help Station. I gave water to a squirrel that was shaking, and I didn't even touch it because you said not to. Then it ran away, but I think it felt better. Thank you for saving the coyote. I hope he's happy now." From Logan D. Ethan stared at the note for a long time. Then he read it again. Natalie watched from the doorway, her arms folded gently, her eyes soft. "That kid's going to change the world," she said. Ethan nodded slowly. "He already has." He pinned the note to the bulletin board in the break room, right beside the photo of the coyote standing on the sanctuary ridge. From that day on, the wall became something else. Not just a place for vet reminders and upcoming appointments, but a tribute. Photos of rescue animals, thank you cards, drawings from kids, quotes scribbled on sticky notes. One simply read, "The wild doesn't need saving, it needs understanding." It became a mosaic of impact, a quiet legacy, told in paper and ink. Weeks passed, then months. The clinic grew busier as summer deepened. Tourists brought in pets from out of town. Local rescues started requesting Ethan's advice. The town council officially approved the community education program, complete with a grant for materials and outreach events. One morning, while preparing for a school visit, Ethan pulled a fresh stack of handouts from his desk drawer. On the cover was a sketch, drawn by another student, of a small coyote sitting under a tree. Below it, the words, "Sometimes heroes have fur." Ethan smiled. The journey that had begun with a shivering, hairless creature wrapped in flannel had become something far more than a rescue story. It had become a movement, not one of spectacle or headlines, but of quiet transformation, of young hearts turning toward compassion, of communities learning to coexist with the wild instead of fearing it, of people beginning to ask, "How can I help?" instead of, "How do I stop it?" All because of one pup, one chance, one decision to say yes, when walking away would have been easier. That evening, as Ethan left the clinic and locked the front door, he glanced up at the tree line beyond the parking lot. The sky was gold with sunset, and for just a second, no more, he thought he saw a shape at the edge of the woods, low to the ground, still, watching. Then it vanished into the shadows. Maybe it was his imagination. Maybe it wasn't. Either way, he smiled, because in his heart, he knew some connections never fade, and some goodbyes are never really the end. The story didn't end when the pup left. It didn't end when the town stopped talking, because some journeys never truly end at all. Fall crept into Elkridge Falls on silent feet. The trees traded their summer greens for fiery golds and deep smoldering reds. The morning air carried the scent of wood smoke and damp earth. Life at Pinebrook Animal Clinic slowed slightly, the summer rush fading, replaced by the steady rhythms of colder days. Ethan embraced the change with a quiet gratitude. He spent his early mornings with coffee in hand, walking the edge of his property where the woods stretched endlessly into the horizon. Sometimes he imagined he heard distant howls carried on the crisp air, short, sharp yips that stirred old memories. Other times he didn't imagine at all. Some mornings he found fresh tracks near the creek, small, careful paw prints weaving between the roots and stones, always traveling east, always moving forward. He never followed them. He didn't need to. The story wasn't about recapturing what had been. It was about knowing it had existed at all. In the clinic, life had taken on a new depth. The bulletin board grew richer with new stories. Rescued turtles, birds with broken wings, fawns caught in fences, but freed with gentle hands. More children from the town's elementary school signed up for Wildlife Guardian Club, inspired by Logan's small but mighty efforts. Natalie often joked that Pinebrook had become as much a conservation center as a vet clinic. Ethan didn't mind. He liked seeing the drawings of coyotes and owls taped to the exam room doors. He liked hearing parents ask how to teach their kids respect for creatures they'd once considered pests. He liked knowing that understanding was replacing fear, one ripple at a time. Late one Saturday afternoon, after the last appointment had ended and the sun had begun its slow descent behind the mountains, Ethan stood once again at the rear fence line of the clinic. He watched the light filtering through the trees, each ray catching on drifting leaves, turning them to gold. In his pocket, he carried a simple pendant, a gift from Sienna, made from a single tuft of coyote fur encased in resin. A reminder, she had said, of what they had done, of what they had let go. He rolled it between his fingers thoughtfully. It wasn't about ownership. It wasn't about taming. It wasn't even about rescue. It was about stewardship, about standing in the space between worlds, human and wild, and choosing every day to honor both. Ethan looked up toward the hills and smiled softly. He didn't know if he would ever see the coyote again, didn't know if their paths would cross, or if the wild creature would even remember him by scent or sound. But that wasn't the point. The point was that once, when it mattered, they had trusted each other. And in doing so, they had each become something better. As twilight deepened, Ethan turned back toward the clinic, his steps sure and easy. Tomorrow would bring new stories, new creatures needing help, new chances to choose compassion over fear. Because the wild wasn't something to be controlled or conquered. It was something to be understood, something to be respected, and sometimes, and when you're lucky, something that remembers you long after you say goodbye.